good morning again, and thank you all for coming, especially special guests that I've invited. I pose to you, what does your spirit look like? We think about how it feels, how it reacts, how it serves others, but we don't define it, or dress it, or identify it. Would you recognize your spirit if it sat next to you at our next meeting? All my life, I have loved fashion. More than half my life, I have been on a spiritual journey to find my way. And what is most fascinating to me is the melding of the two, fashion and spirituality. According to Coco Chanel, fashion is not something that exists only in dresses. Fashion is in the sky, in the street. Fashion has to do with ideas, the way we live, what is happening. Spirituality is the process of realizing the divine and the potential of who we are and what we want to be. Like fashion, spirituality should make you feel good. It connects us to the divine and brings awareness to the greater world and places beyond our singular experiences. Some people find this in nature, in the depths of a forest or standing in front of a roaring ocean. Others find spirituality in symphonies or rock and roll. And still, others find spirituality in viewing Da Vinci's Last Supper or Degas' Elegant Ballerinas. Of course, many find their spirituality in churches, temples, mosques, or meeting houses, just like ours. And while I see and appreciate that spirituality is everywhere, I also see it in my closet. I would like to report that most of my spiritual discovery came about in churches, temples, meeting houses, or mosques. But that simply isn't true. It came about through self-discovery from reading inspirational books, attending women's circles and empowerment groups, yoga and meditation, and hearing and telling stories that are spiritual and essential to us as human beings. That's how I fundamentally became a spiritual person, by looking at the big picture of humanity and seeing my minute but important part in this drama we call life. I came up in the 1950s when polyester and big hair were everywhere. The times were such that people dressed up just to leave the house. In the early 60s, the Beatles arrived on our shores looking mod, polished, and smart. My wardrobe was full of modest, chic dresses and sensible shoes. At this time, our Polish grandmother, Bruce is sleeping, lived with us. You're meditating. Our Polish grandmother lived with us, and while she was alive, we went to Mass every Sunday in our finest. But by the time I was a teenager, the hippies had arrived. With them they brought new music, new attitudes, and new clothing, amongst other things. Traditional staid clothing was replaced with unconventional attire. Leather, velvet, feathers, fringe, long vintage dresses, rose-tinted glasses, bell-bottom jeans, crocheted halter tops, flower crowns, and peace signs, all of which I am happy to report I have worn at one time or another, and probably most of us in this room have. Outrageous stuff, embraced for the sheer preposterousness of it all. Think Janis Joplin, Stevie Nicks, and my favorite, Joni Mitchell. Being an impressionable teenager in the 60s was monumental to both my spiritual and fashionable selves. Between the years of 1965 and 1971, something happened that made one side of the divide unrecognizable from the other side. Culture turned upside down. While clothing was an expression of what side of the divide you were on, spiritual seeking became paramount. People studied Eastern religion, EST, and Gestalt therapies. Enlightenment and self-realization through yoga and meditation were coming to people's consciousness. Excuse me. From these conversations came anti-war protest, political activism, which included feminist, environmental, and civil rights. All these movements had clothing that identified what side of the divide you were on. As a college student in Worcester, Massachusetts, I studied fashion merchandising and literature. College was a spiritual experience in its own right, but that's another story. While in school, I had my first taste of democracy in action. In 1970, I campaigned under the auspices of the Roman Catholic Church for their beloved Ted Kennedy's Senate re-election campaign, and more foolishly, hitchhiked from Worcester to Boston to protest the Vietnam War. These are the roots of my quest for social justice and my personal spiritual questioning. Upon graduating, I became an assistant coat buyer at a store called Ormond's in North Jersey, where I cut my teeth on the merchandising side of fashion. This experience taught me that clothes are so much more than what we put on our bodies. They are an outward expression of our inward thoughts and feelings. My relationship to style became a spiritual journey and one of my greatest passions. The clothes we wear tell a story, not just about the wearer, but about the hands that made them and from where the clothes came. Today, chances are most of the clothes in our closets and dressers are not made in America. And so with our individual style selections, we are also making an important social statement. Large organizations like Nike are infamously linked to sweatshops with terrible working conditions. And yet Nike remains one of the most prevalent and recognized brands available. However, more and more, we are seeing socially conscious organizations where fair trade and ethical practice takes the stand. Eileen Fisher and Patagonia being two of the more popular names. As a young mother in rural Kansas, I chose to diaper my babies in cloth. It was a conscious decision not to use disposable diapers because of their negative environmental and financial impact. Likewise, most of the clothing my daughters and I wore were garage sale finds, as a further environmental statement of awareness to consumerism. As my girls grew, I instilled in them the importance of reusing, reducing, recycling, and of course, fashion. The fabric of my family is woven with strong thread, and my love of fashion and Mother Earth shine through in the wearings of my daughters, my grandchildren, and me today. Our fashion statement can be profound and personal. Fashion designers are aiming for a new kind of depth and even transcendence. Why all this grasping toward the sacred? Maybe it is because the world has grown smaller through the advent of technology that takes us there. We see the plight of others, actually see it, and at that instant we are connected to them. Plus, consumers today have more on their minds than last season's Kaftan. We are well-traveled, well-read, socially conscious, local, and spiritual. When a company is forward-thinking, as many young brands are, they seek to not only bring traditional handicrafts and styles to us, but to strive to employ and empower those very communities, which is a very UU principle. Throughout history, clothing and jewelry have been used in rites of passages and religious ceremonies to depict ritual and important events in people's lives. Specific dress finds itself in many religions and cultural customs. Elaborate Native American headdress, Catholic nuns' modest habit, Buddhist monks' saffron robes, frilly white communion dresses, veiled Muslims in burqas, the hats and vestments of Hasidism. A spiritual approach to fashion starts from the inside, then goes out. It begins with our spiritual connectedness and the inner beauty we feel when we make that connection. The clothes, then, become our expression of our spirits. Ceremony is spiritual, and linking communities to these ceremonial traditions is a connection made via fashion. It is beauty beyond ego. Spirituality is usually associated with things we see as greater and more important than ourselves. It makes us think of a higher power, enlightened thought, prayer, and meditation, how we connect to others, the universe, and the meaning of life itself, or the inner world. Contrarily, fashion is associated with materialism, frivolity, and unnecessarily shallow and superficial gains, or the outer world. But I disagree. I think fashion and spirituality can be mutually agreeable to each other. When we practice our daily ablutions, be it quick showers or lengthy bubble baths, we perform cleansing rituals to prepare our bodies for our outwardly expressive selves. If our bodies are temples, then surely how we care for them and choose to adorn them are intrinsic parts of our spiritual experiences. Fashion is a way to enhance our experiences of the world and express one's whole self. While living in Lawrence, Kansas, I worked at a community theater. My friendship with the wardrobe mistress was enhanced by my love of fashion. I had access to the costumes and accessory room containing vintage dresses. Oh, I can just see them and smell them. Hats, coats. It was pure delight to spend time with all these items with stories and histories of their own. And that's a whole separate story. Used clothing and where they've been and who's worn them. Following my departure from Kansas, I left the fanciful theater world for real-life theater, the courtroom. I was surprised to find parallels between theater and court, but they do exist. For example, both are dramatic performances with ritual and costumery. But more so, I was struck by the thought that the courtroom is like a place of worship. The reverence, solemnity, and respect cast upon it through tradition are cornerstones of spiritual scripture. The judicial code strongly mimics our 7 principles, highlighting the importance of justice, equality, and liberty. Having worked for the state of New Jersey in a governmental environment for almost 25 years, which I still can't, I'm still living in Kansas, 25 years ago, has been a challenge concerning my personal self-expression. While my clothing options are somewhat restricted by a dress code, I still manage to express my unique style through my dress. One wouldn't look to the courtroom as a venue for varied clothing style, but it is. A judge presides in a flowing black robe. The attorneys are all attired in conservative suits and monochromatic colors. The sheriff's officers wear authoritative black and gray uniforms. The inmates are clad in jumpsuits of various colors determined by their threat levels. And so, naturally, my affinity for color, texture, and accessories, I stand out in an otherwise black and white world. In an environment like a jail, where uniformity is necessary, I appreciate the ability to express myself through my eclectic wardrobe. The juxtaposition of my freedom of expression and the inmates' lack thereof is disconcerting and evident. My extensive tenure in the courtroom has solidified the inherent worth and dignity of every person. It is this paired with my unconventional attire that opens the doors for inmates to feel comfortable speaking to me, because I distinguish myself from others in the courtroom by dressing differently. I think Quinn and I said, a peacock amid a bunch of crows. Through my affiliation with the UU, I appreciate the plight of all and bring that sensibility to everyone in the courtroom, including the inmates. I once read a quote about pulling threads from an invisible world. The thought struck me. I love the notion of creating a new fabric of reality through the interdependent web of all existence of which we are a part. Many years ago, our relationship to clothing was much more intimate. The wearer was also the dreamer, the creator, and the weaver. We were more connected to our clothing because of the process of creating it. I say it is time we start dreaming and weaving again. In these polarizing times, I am a spiritual girl in a material world and a material girl in a spiritual world. I appreciate the ineffable and the frivolous, the higher power and the lower price. Fashion is more than clothing, and can lift your spirit with love, color, and energy. Spirituality provides us with meaning, hope, and community. Together, they provide inspiration and self-actualization. Iris Apfel is a 94-year-old fashion icon known for her penchant for accessorizing and oversized spectacles. Though she said these following words about fashion, I'm pretty confident they can be applied to spirituality as well. More is more, and less is a bore. And lastly, I ask you to reflect upon your spirit and what it might look like. I've gotten to know mine quite well over the years, and though she has left me sometimes...
There's a whole group of deer running through.
Oh, yes! Oh!
There's a whole bunch of them.
How beautiful! Did you see them, Dad?
They upstaged you.
I asked for that.
Sorry. It was just
Perfect.
never happened
That
during
is-
church.
Of course. So I asked you to reflect upon your spirit and what it might look like. I've gotten to know mine quite well over the years, and though she has left me sometimes or has been unrecognizable, I know today just what she looks like. She wears a flowing chiffon skirt, an indigo cashmere sweater, my mother's squash blossom necklace, and leopard slippers. And though she is a spirit, she is fierce.